Hi guys, so I am starting with a prepped tumbler. I did lightly sand it and clean it, and I'm using Pop of Color in Blush from Counterculture DIY. I love using these paints because they dry quick and they are pretty simple to get a nice even base coat down. So I'm using a big fluffy brush. I know these are a favorite brush. They're hard to find. You can grab any inexpensive makeup brush, Target, Walmart, wherever you're at. Anything that looks like a fluffy blush, ooh, say that 3 times fast, will work really well for these paints to get that really nice coverage. So I'm kind of just dipping back into the paint and getting a nice amount onto the brush so that I'm not stretching it too thin, and so that I can also have the ability to work it where it needs to go. So like if you have a little bit excess paint on there, you can move it around easier as opposed to having a dry brush and trying to just like stretch the paint around. So I do use some back and forth motions on here, but overall I try to make sure that I keep long uniform brush strokes, and that just helps the overall coverage and it helps the end result to be smooth. So anytime I see an area that maybe has a little bit of not as smooth as I want it to look, then I just take my brush and just swipe over it to smooth it out. Getting that handle can be a little bit tricky, but you want to just make sure you go in there, get the handle coated, and then clean up any areas around that you need to afterwards. Don't forget the bottom unless you're taping that off and not painting it. So I am going to do the first coat, and then I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to come back and do a second coat. So you're going to want to prep accordingly. You do need to let that dry completely before you come back and do the second coat. If you're having a hard time getting your paint, like if you're not moving quick enough to where your paint is drying on you before you want it to, then you can use a water mister and lightly mist your surface so that it's easier for you to spread that paint on. Doing it on a cup, I haven't had to actually resort to that because I'm able to just dip just enough into the paint to where I can smooth it back and forth. You guys will notice here on that first coat I kind of went ham, like I was just like slapping it on back and forth. And on this second coat here, I'm being a little bit more gentle because I want to make sure that I have a smooth overall coverage. So I'm kind of dipping in, but I'm not taking globs of paint. I'm dipping it in just lightly into the paint and then smoothing up and down in the same direction all the way around the cup. And just making sure you pay close attention to that handle area. Unless you're not painting that, then don't worry about it. Just getting all of that paint on there. The beautiful thing is you can see the difference between the wet paint and the dry paint, so you can tell where you need to go over with the brush to get a good coat. So I'm just going in here, making sure that I have all the little areas on that handle completely coated. I don't want to have to come in and fix any mistakes later. I want to be able to let it dry and move on to the next step. So I'm taking extra care to make sure that all of those little areas are completely coated. You can see here I just dipped right into the lid because I didn't want a ton of paint on my brush, but I did want enough to be able to coat that handle. So I'm just dipping it right into the lid to just get the brush wettened down with the paint and not completely like soaked in it. And then once you kind of go around the inside of that handle, sometimes you have to smooth around the outside with your brush just in case you got any little marks in there from going in and painting it. And then getting that bottom, of course. I'm a really big fan of using these pop of color paints. There's so many colors to choose from, and they just have the most beautiful finish to me. I can spray paint, but my area isn't really set up for spray painting, so whenever I have to do any type of painting, I choose to use these instead of spray painting. So now I've let my cup completely dry with the 2 coats, and I'm going to go ahead and apply my epoxy. I'm using Speed Dry epoxy from Mr. Nola's Glitter. And I don't keep track of exactly how much I measure out. It's about a tablespoon, if I had to say. I thought I was going to use the excess on another project. As you'll see, I ended up not doing that, but I didn't have to mix as much epoxy as I mixed. I could have used way less. I'm just going to get my equal parts, part A and part B, measured out here. And if you guys haven't had a chance to try this epoxy yet, if you're looking at trying something different or want to see what else is going out there, this one comes highly recommended by me. It's one of the only epoxies that I haven't had some kind of reaction to. I never used to have reactions to epoxy, but all of a sudden it just doesn't like me much anymore, and this one I've been able to use with no problems whatsoever. That's everything to me. Like, it's the smell of it and everything, and I haven't had any issues. So I'm going to take my little cups here with my stick, and I'm going to scrape around the edges really, really good to make sure that I'm getting every single bit of epoxy out of that cup as I possibly can. Just taking my time there, making sure I'm getting all the way around those edges really good. I'm getting as much of that off of there as I can. And I do take both parts and mix them into a clean cup. I don't mix one into the other. I like to take them both and put them in their own cup. I was going to speed this part of the video up, and then I decided I might as well just go ahead and show you guys in real time exactly what this looks like, because some of the details get missed. Some of the little things that we do and don't realize we're doing get overlooked when we speed the videos up. So this is real time. Now I'm going pretty hard on this epoxy. Don't come for me. It's the way I do things. I'm a pretty rough mixer. I like to make sure that I go completely around the edges of the cup, and then I take the stick and go into that little crevice that's at the bottom of my cup. Not all cups have that, but these do. So I make sure I take that edge of the stick and I get down in there and make sure I'm mixing all of that epoxy up together as best I can. If you're not getting a thorough mix of the epoxy, then your curing is going to be off. You can run into a lot of different issues from not having epoxy that's thoroughly mixed. One of which is that it doesn't cure hard. It can stay tacky, or you can have tacky spots. So I'm going to take one of our additives from the Tarot collection, the Moon. This is a little bit larger flake additive. It's translucent, but it shimmers, so it doesn't throw off a bunch of rainbow colors. And I chose this one because I wanted to have a little bit of subtle sparkle on this cup, but I didn't necessarily want glitter. I know, why wouldn't I want glitter? But I had a vision in mind. I had this concept in my brain, and this is what seemed most appropriate to me for what end result I was looking for. So I'm just taking that and mixing it in really well. And it was right about here, I think, I realized that I wanted my turner to spin the other direction. So that's what I did there. I just adjusted it so that it would be turning what I consider to be the correct direction. So I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to start smoothing that epoxy on. I like to do little bits at a time so I can kind of stay in control of where it's going. Make sure I smooth around that top edge. And I kind of like to get the top of it done and then move my way down the cup as I'm seeing the different little spots. That handle can be a little bit of a bear, so you have to really pay close attention to it. What I was doing here is anytime I had epoxy on my hands from smoothing over the cup, as it came around, I took whatever was left on my hands and then smoothed that onto the handle. Trying to get that whole top section done and then that bottom section, get that good thin. You don't really need a thick layer on here, just a thin layer will work. And I shouldn't have done that, you guys. If you're doing one of these cups with the handles, don't put a big glob of epoxy on there like I just did. I thought it would make it easier for me to smooth around and get it completely coated, but it ended up kind of being a hot mess. I had too much on there. These are things that I know because I've done these before, but I just wasn't thinking. So I'm kind of just going back and forth, making sure that I have every single little spot on that cup completely coated. You can kind of see the sparkle from that additive we put in, how it gives it a shimmer, but it doesn't take away from the base color, which is exactly what I was wanting. I was wanting it to be shimmery, but not distracting. So now I'm going to go ahead and take my torch. I use the torch to remove any bubbles that are in the epoxy, and you got to move this thing quick, you guys. Don't linger in one spot with a torch. You'll regret it. It burns the epoxy, it breaks down the epoxy, it makes it so that your epoxy can cure brittle. It can be a whole mess. So don't stay in one spot for very long. I move that thing non-stop. Like, it does not stop moving. And I just keep going over a few turns. Kind of smoothing it around a little bit more after that. And then I was going to go ahead and use what was left in this cup on here. This part isn't necessary. I ended up actually using my hand, as you'll see in a second, to remove some of that excess epoxy because I just didn't like the way that it was moving around the cup and curing with that handle. So if it didn't have a handle on it, then that wouldn't have been a problem. But because it does have a handle on it, any little bit of extra epoxy was collecting around the handle, and I didn't want it to create a lump. So I ended up actually going and kind of removing some of the epoxy with my hand very gently. As you can see there, I kind of am looking at it and I'm like, yeah, that's kind of a lot. We didn't need that much. That's too much. We don't need that much. If it's gooping like that and you don't even have any glitter underneath, like, see that when I would run my hand along it and then I would move, I would have like a big glob. We don't want those globs. Those globs leave bumps. So I started kind of like rubbing my hand across it and scraping. Oh my gosh, this cracks me up because what a mess I was making. Scraping off very gently. Like, I'm not doing it very hard. I'm not going in and like digging off the epoxy. I'm just kind of rubbing my hand along it, smoothing it, and then scraping my hand off so that if there's any excess on my hand, I'm not just putting it somewhere else on the cup. And again, this is real time, you guys. I didn't edit out any of the footage, so you are seeing this exactly as it was happening. The good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Feel like I got a good acceptable amount of epoxy on there. smoothing out around those handle bases so that it doesn't collect there. And then I'm going to torch it again. I had to take that glove off because, man, it was covered in epoxy. So I'm just going to run that torch up and down, keeping it moving so that I can pop any extra bubbles that may have gotten stuck in there while I was moving epoxy around. This also helps it to cure smooth and even. All right, so I waited for that to cure. It was a speed coat, but I was waiting for that to cure. I think I waited until the next day instead of doing it the same day. And then what I have here is Aleene's Tack It Over and Over and water. And it's like a 80-20. Okay, so 80% Aleene's, 20% water. And I put it into one of the little needle point squeeze bottles so that I could have a precise application. So I'm just kind of rough drafting here, like I'm just going for it. I didn't have a real plan other than I knew I wanted to create a spider web here. So I'm just kind of going for it, just putting a line on there, and I figured I would branch off from that line and see where it took us. And for a spider web, you know, you do your center line, you do it the longest. And then each line that comes off of it, you do just a little bit shorter. And that's going to create that like shape of the web. And the reason you want this mixture to remain pretty thick is so that it doesn't go running off of your cup as you move it around. So this could get pretty messy if your mixture is too watery. Just kind of going in here, adding all my little lines in. And you can kind of eyeball it and see where one may need to be longer, or you can make it longer after you put the little connecting web parts in. This is where it was going to get tricky because I'm right-handed. So I needed to be able to get to the other side without messing up what I already did and still keeping the cup in frame so you guys could see what was going on. So as I was standing there, I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I figured it out. Just going in there and getting those lines mapped out. If you need to, you can pull up a reference photo of a spider web. If you know if this part doesn't make sense to you, then you can just pull up a reference photo and follow along. So then you do the little connectors, and you see those first two. I did them upside down. I was looking at the camera angle and not at the actual cup. I was looking through the camera and I totally did them upside down, but you can't even tell. So you're just basically going in and you're connecting the two lines together with little C's, little letter C's. See, it's starting to come together, it's starting to look like a real life spider web there. I apologize for this part being blurry. The phone just did not know where to focus because my big old hand was in the way. But you can kind of still see in the background there. I'm just making the letter C and connecting those. And it's going to look a little bit less like a C when I start doing the other part, but you'll still get the gist of it. It's going to look like a backwards C. If I can figure out a way to do these types of designs without having my hand in the way the whole time, then that might be helpful. But I think that I managed to make it so that you guys could see kind of what was going on without completely destroying the design in the meantime. So if you're looking at it and you see that, you know, that you need to fill some space or whatever, just extend your lines and fill it in however need be. You're just going to give gentle pressure on your bottle so that you don't squeeze like a ton, like a big old glob out all at once. That was a really rough angle there. I'm holding the cup basically sideways. And then see where I was kind of starting to run over on me, because you want to keep your cup as flat as you can while you're doing this. But for sake of the video and showing you guys, I had to keep maneuvering it a lot. So I want to continue that spiderweb. I want to continue it like above the handle right there where you can see. But in order for me to make sure that I don't have a huge mess and it doesn't roll over and ruin my design, I have to keep it just on this one side for now. So I'm going to take Cullen, which I thought I held that bottle up, but I guess, you know, I guess maybe I didn't. So I'm taking Cullen, one of our microfines, and I'm sprinkling that onto the wet adhesive. Do this over a piece of paper because it takes very little to stick to the adhesive. It uses barely any at all, but you want to get every part of that web completely coated in glitter. So you kind of want to be able to over sprinkle a little bit. Like you want to get more than enough of it in there, and then you want to kind of go from each side, kind of tilt it and go from the side so that it gets all the way around that dimensional spider web. Don't pat this, don't slap it, don't do a bunch of crazy shaking. Like I just tipped it over and just gently shook it. Your instinct is going to be to like tap, tap, tap it. And then I blew on it, just a little blow on it. So that's not the end result. That's not how it's going to look when it's finished. But you have to let that dry before you mess with it so that it doesn't get ruined. Here I'm looking for something I can stick underneath the handle to keep my cup from rotating so that my my line there doesn't mess up. So I didn't like the way it was sitting, so I grabbed something else. So this is just another little container because I didn't want it to slide around at all. I wanted it to stay put while that adhesive dried. And I was recording the whole time I was doing this, so like right there, I need more spider web right there. So this is a little bit after it had dried. The video just kind of, I hit record and just went with it instead of marking my space on where I was. So now that that other section over there is dry, I'm going in with that adhesive again and I'm extending that spider web to the side where I wanted it. Again, the reason I didn't do this at first, like all together, is because I didn't want that side of it to drip or run. I wanted it to stay as even as possible so that the spider web didn't lose any of its detail. And then I realized after I laid down this adhesive that I did my C's backwards. I was filming this in between helping customers at the shop, so I kept having to stop and help people that were coming in because I was trying to do it in any little amount of extra time I had. So my brain kept getting a little bit sidetracked and I would forget which direction I started in. If you're sitting down and you're doing this like all in one swoop, you won't have that problem. But it is what it is. You really can't tell. So just run with your mistakes. If you think that you made a mistake and messed something up, don't give up on it. Just keep going with it because you really can't tell. So there's that finished spider web. So what I'm doing here is I'm kind of poking that adhesive down where I already put the glitter over it, so I can make sure that where it meets where I left off before, that it looks pretty even there, if that makes sense. So I kind of like smooshed the adhesive down and put a little bit more glitter over it so that it would look like it was all one piece there. And it does look more cohesive once that side of adhesive does dry, because it does look a little different wet from dry. So my intention was to put quite a few of these spider webs on here. So you guys are going to get to see this again. You're going to get to see this in a couple different areas. And I'm just making those lines. I do one long line, and then each line that comes after is a little bit shorter as I move my way around. And because I was filming this, you guys know I was like worried about making sure that you could see what was going on and that I wasn't completely messing it up. If I were doing this not on video, then I would have been all over the place. Like I probably would have had this done in about 10 minutes because I would have just been going for it. But I really wanted to make sure that I was moving in a way that you guys could actually see how I was accomplishing the design. Because I definitely didn't want to make this look like it was too difficult, because I really think that this is one of those ones where anyone can accomplish this. And it ends up looking so beautiful once it's all done, because you have this really simple, beautiful, sophisticated, chic cup. Well, I kind of went overboard on that, didn't I? And then you add this almost three-dimensional spider web into it. It's spooky, but it's pretty. So now I'm going to take Cullen again. Like, there it is. Now I showed you what I'm using. And I'm going to sprinkle that onto that wet adhesive. I was trying to make sure that I kept this thing in frame. That was not an easy task. So I apologize. I know part of this ends up going off camera there for a second. But I'm just sprinkling the Cullen onto that adhesive spider web. Now you can see. So I kind of turn it side to side, turn it to the left, turn it to the right, make sure that when you get the glitter on there that you're getting it from all sides. That's a gentle tap. I know it doesn't look gentle, but that's a gentle tap. And then I blow on it a little. And then I'm going to set that aside and let that one dry so that I can come back and start working on the other side. Now, once the adhesive completely dries, you can brush it off with a dry paintbrush and then move on to the next step. So I'll see you guys back for part 2. Thanks for watching.